Oral questions by members.
Member for Prince George Valemount.
Mr. Speaker, well, under this Premier's watch, a taxpayer-funded drug crisis has exploded. Urgent warnings from doctors over the past 18 months were dismissed despite the growing and undeniable proof. Diverted hydromorphone pills, or dillies, now flood platforms like Reddit, sold openly by the tens of thousands. Shocking images show mounds of white pills next to their original prescription bottles, part of the NDP's so-called safe supply. When is the Premier going to stop turning a blind eye to this devastating taxpayer-funded drug trafficking?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I had the opportunity to visit the New Roads Treatment Centre in Saanich, and there I met a young man named Tyson who described how 5 months ago he was a broken man in a jail cell, and thanks to the efforts of New Roads, the staff there, the community, he's on a better path. And I think that's the goal, and I heard the member from South Surrey talk about a gentleman from White Rock. That's the goal we all have for people struggling with mental health or addiction issues. The goal is to keep them alive. Now, there was a point when all the parties in this place agreed that we have to try different things. We've got almost 13,000 people who've died as a result of the toxic drug crisis, and we will continue to do that work. It has required refinement, as we said it would, as we all agreed it would. And we've taken the steps necessary to protect parks, communities, businesses, bus stops, but also, most importantly, the people, the brothers, the sisters, the aunts, the uncles, the parents, the kids that are struggling with addiction.
Member for Prince George Valemount, supplemental.
Well, I'd like to assure the Premier that the Health Committee didn't endorse buckets of pills on the streets. Apparently, the only people endorsing that approach are the Premier and his minister. There is undeniable photographic evidence, and yet this Premier and his NDP government continue to fuel the NDP taxpayer-funded drug crisis. On Reddit, there's talk of dealers obtaining, and I quote, literal buckets, with alarming comments about the NDP government handing them out like candy and throwing them around like TikToks. Reddit users openly discuss how this so-called safe supply recipients sell their dillies to purchase fentanyl. How much longer will the Premier ignore the solutions offered by a plan like ours, where better is possible, and stop funding rampant drug traffickers?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. What an embarrassment. You know, this member sat on the all-party committee and understands the complexity and the challenge of this issue. No one in this place supports buckets of any kind of illicit drug that cause the kind of havoc that opioids do. This government sued the producers of those opioid pills successfully, leading all the provinces across Canada to the largest settlement in Canada. Not only that, we're taking it, absolutely, Canadian history. Not only that, we're taking action on the illegal drug dealers as well. The RCMP in September of this year, 6 suspects, one of the largest drug busts in BC history, $256 million worth of fentanyl. The last 2 convicted each got 11 years in jail. In March, $13 million in drugs, guns, and cash for arrests. We seized the Hells Angels clubhouses, and we're keeping them, Honourable Speaker. For the member to pretend that we are anything other than going after the drug dealers, whether they work for the big pharma companies or whether they work for the criminal gangs, is completely false.
Member Prince George Valemount, supplemental.
Well, let me be clear with the Premier. What the Health Committee did discuss was how to try to keep people alive, not endorsing a situation that is leading to increased addiction and potentially death. Under this Premier's direction, directly due to his policies, cheap hydromorphone is creating new dependencies in people who were not previously addicted. Its street value has plummeted by up to 95%, and that is a direct result of the NDP government flooding the market. And these cheap drugs are promoted to teenagers as being safe. Desperate parents are calling MLA offices multiple times a week, stating that their child, believing they were taking a safe supply, is now addicted. Will the Premier do the right thing and end this NDP taxpayer-funded drug crisis that is causing devastating harms?
Premier.
Speaker, we continue to work with the public health officials. We're working with frontline addictions doctors on how to respond to this crisis. We're going to continue to do that work. I would say that the goal here is to keep people alive. I agree with the member on that. I agree that was the goal of the committee. That is the shared goal of this House. And to pretend that there's some kind of division where actually parties in this House want people to be addicted, want them to die of overdose, want kids to start new addictions, it's absurd, Honourable Speaker. And the member's been in this place long enough that she should be embarrassed to stand up and promote that. It was the member across the way.
Members will come to order. Members.
The members across the way watched surveillance video of drug dealers bringing bags of cash into BC casinos for a generation and didn't take action. So with all due respect, we are the party that's taken action on organized crime and drug dealing by getting physicians and nurses between predatory dealers and people struggling with addiction. We're going to keep doing that work, Honourable Speaker. We're going to make sure to help people deal with addiction.
Official Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, it is absolutely stunning that this Premier refuses to acknowledge the problem that is diversion that's taking place across British Columbia. So let me bring it back to a real person that's been impacted. The photos on Reddit tell the story of the NDP's taxpayer-funded drug crisis, as online platforms have become easy gateways for our youth to access these taxpayer-funded drugs. Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what happened to 13-year-old Camilla Sword and her friends, according to Camilla's father. Her father says, and I quote, "I got blindsided. I didn't understand how easy it was for these girls to get it," end quote. Now, after first becoming addicted to hydromorphone, young 13-year-old Camilla tragically passed away. She overdosed. So to the Premier, how many more lives like Camilla's will be lost before this Premier admits the harm caused by the NDP's taxpayer-funded drug crisis?
Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker, and I want to thank the member for the question and to express, I trust on behalf of the entire House, our deep condolences to Camilla's father for the grief that he is enduring and I know will endure for the rest of his life. We understand that there are particular challenges that children and youth are facing. We are working very hard with health authorities, with frontline partners to scale up access to child and youth mental health services. We have substantially expanded our Foundry network of primary care and mental health services. We are developing integrated child care youth teams that work in schools with MCFD and with our healthcare system to intervene and provide opportunities to connect kids to care. Our primary consideration is to ensure that children and youth have the access to the care that they need.
Member supplemental.
Well, with all due respect to the Minister, the government's plans on this front are failing miserably. I can speak to a youth detox facility in Kamloops that where the government made, with a lot of fanfare, a big announcement around 5 detox beds for youth many, many months ago. The member from Kamloops North Thompson and I were in there not long ago. We were walking around. We were being shown the space. The bed is there, all of the facility. It's all ready to go. There's one thing missing. There's no youth in those beds because there's no staff for them. The policy is a failure, and the minister knows it. Online platforms like Reddit and Snapchat are the front lines of the NDP's taxpayer-funded drug crisis, offering children and teenagers easy access to these highly addictive drugs. The heartbreaking loss of young Camilla should have served as a wake-up call on the dangers of describing these drugs as safe supply. Yet there's been zero accountability, no warnings, no educational campaigns, no tracking. This NDP government has failed in its most basic duty to protect the public, especially children and youth like Camilla. How many more tragedies does it take for the Premier to be accountable and to accept responsibility for the NDP's taxpayer-funded drug crisis?
Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And I have to say, with all due respect, it's a bit rich coming from the party that closed the only youth detox centre in Chilliwack when they were on this side of the House to talk about access that children and youth need, that access that we are funding and that we are scaling up. We agree. It is really critical that we work with experts, that we work with the education system and the healthcare system to ensure that we are talking to youth about substance use in these times in the context of a toxic drugs crisis that has stolen thousands and thousands of lives of British Columbians. We really have to pay attention to how we're talking to youth. The Education Ministry, my ministry are working very closely together along with frontline providers. The Foundry, we have the Foundry services in working with school districts to provide targeted education to kids about this very topic. It's work that we are expanding. I absolutely agree. How we are talking to youth is very important.
House Leader of Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The BC NDP government must at least hold themselves to the same standard as they held government when they were in opposition. When the BC NDP were led by John Horgan, in opposition, they set an appropriate standard. When a Minister of Children and Family Development repeatedly fails to protect the most vulnerable children in our province, they must step aside. The current minister thought highly of the former Premier. And the words of John Horgan to the former minister on September 28th is as applicable today as it was then. He said, quote, "In light of the pattern over the past few months, Honourable Speaker, through you to the minister, how is it possible you can continue to believe that you have the leadership skills to navigate this sensitive ministry and stop protecting the ministry and start protecting children?"
Minister of Children and Family Development.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. Again, as I said last week, I understand his passion and his concern, and I share that as well. As the Minister, I have been and will continue to be determined to drive transformative change through my role as Minister. So that means through legislation, through policy, through budgetary measures. So, for example, Honourable Speaker, we passed legislation last year to support Indigenous jurisdiction.
Had very little to do with the actual question that I was asking. It's about the leadership of the entire ministry. Mr. Speaker, that September 2015, the BC NDP were questioning the former minister about the death of a young man in her care. The BC NDP stood member after member, day after day. Horgan, James, Donaldson, Mungal, Simpson, all stood and called for the minister to step aside. That was 8 years ago. Despite claims that the minister just made that this ministry is undergoing transformation, reports continue rolling in describing the awful neglect and harm that this ministry is causing. Incredibly, the minister agrees with the criticism, offers a weak apology, and then stubbornly flouts the long tradition of responsible governments. If she won't go on her own, then we need unwavering leadership from the Premier to do what is right. But so far, this Premier wavers, waiting until the timing works for him, putting his political agenda against the welfare of our children. Mr. Speaker, through you to the Premier, will he do the right thing, replace his minister, her senior staff at the Ministry of Children and Family Development?
Minister.
Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the member. Honourable Speaker, as soon as the ministry learned of the problems in the particular foster home 2.5 years ago, action was taken. The ministry made sure that all of the children that team was responsible for were seen and that their placements were safe and nurturing and loving. All of those placement decisions were reviewed and other steps have been taken to increase accountability and to increase oversight as well. Extra checks and extra layers have been put in because I directed staff I said to them, you need to be able to show me that all of the children and youth in our care are safe and are being loved and being well taken care of.
Member
Unlike
for Surrey South.
every single year, the Ministry of Children and Family Development under the NDP government has seen an increase in its budget, Honourable Speaker. We're supporting young people and diverting them away from the highway to homelessness. We're supporting young people, children and youth actually living in out-of-care placements, unlike under the previous government where the budget was gutted.
House Leader of the Fourth Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This morning I received a petition from over 40,000 Surrey residents and taxpayers who are asking this government to keep the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Surrey. I am told that the previous Premier John Horgan was given this petition, but he refused to address it in this House. So today, as the House Leader for the Conservative Party of British Columbia, who does listen to taxpayers, I am speaking on behalf of the 40,000 Surrey residents and taxpayers who have signed this petition, who have been outright ignored by this NDP government. I'm holding a fraction of those in my hand. I am asking this government to listen to this 40,000 Surrey residents who will be footing the increased property tax bill to pay for the City of Surrey to have its own police force. Will this new NDP Premier commit here and now to holding a referendum on policing in Surrey, or will he continue the NDP's long-standing policy of bullying and ignoring Surrey residents and taxpayers?
Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. No.
Member supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This NDP Premier isn't just bullying Surrey taxpayers. He isn't ignoring just Surrey taxpayers. His authoritarian approach is actually punishing taxpayers and communities all across British Columbia, Mr. Speaker. In my home community of Abbotsford, the taxpayers' share of the $150 million this NDP government is spending works out to over $4.5 million. $4.5 million that could be better spent in their community. What does this Premier have to say to hard-working Abbotsford residents and beyond who are now also on the hook to pay for the absolute mess his government has created in the City of Surrey by ignoring and bullying Surrey taxpayers and voters?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I appreciate the question from the member, and I'd just like to remind him before I answer the bulk of his question that the province gave the City of Abbotsford more than $27 million from the Building BC Infrastructure Fund earlier this year. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to point out to the member that what Surrey wanted to do was to transition back to the RCMP after they were already well into a transition to the Surrey Police Service. The analysis shows by the experts within my ministry and outside my ministry that the challenge for communities is the impact that that transition of the largest RCMP detachment would have in communities right across this province, Honourable Speaker. And I can tell the member that when the decision was made to move to continue with the Surrey Police Service, I heard from communities right across this province, including your own community of Abbotsford, that the decision I made was the right decision in terms of public safety, not only for Surrey, but for all of British Columbia.
Member for Kamloops North Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, earlier we heard the Premier and the Mental Health and Addictions Minister do what they do best in this chamber, and that's try to point fingers everywhere else but take their own responsibility. I'll point out to the Minister that Camilla was 6 years old when this government took office, when she overdosed at 13 and perished. It's this government's failures and policy that we're talking about here today, and it's this government's policies and their failures that are impacting people in the here and the now. Taxpayer-funded drug trafficking thrives on platforms like Reddit. And that's well known now. Tens of thousands of hydromorphone pills are openly being sold. In BC, it's reported that drug traffickers have assembled teams of safe supply clients who sell their 32 daily pills directly outside the pharmacies back to the dealers for 50 cents a pill. The dealers then amass tens of thousands of pills, they traffic them across the country, and they make huge profits. How much longer will the Premier continue to fuel the NDP's taxpayer-funded drug trafficking crisis?
Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thanks very much, Honourable Speaker, and thanks to the member for the question. And I just want to remind the House that that our work with respect to providing prescribed alternatives to the illicit toxic drug supply, which was declared a public emergency in 2016, which took over 2,300 British Columbian lives last year. That program came into being at the beginning of the pandemic, largely in response to what we knew would be dramatic impacts on the ability of individuals to reach out to healthcare, to continue to have healthcare supports, and out of concern for public health that there would be an even more dramatic impact during the COVID pandemic as a result of the toxic drug supply. That program is under review by the provincial health officers, so that we can ensure that it meets the needs that people have today, given that we're no longer in the grips of the COVID-19 pandemic. But I would say, Honourable Speaker, that the importance of having a mechanism to come between predatory drug dealers who prey on vulnerable people and having our healthcare system able to intervene and support individuals. That's the objective of the program. That's what we're working on with our health authorities, with frontline providers, with public health. It's the work we'll continue to do.
Member supplemental.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Speaker, these taxpayer-supplied addictive drugs, they've become a commodity to trade for fentanyl, the very drug that the program is supposed to be trying to combat. The diversion fuels the taxpayer-funded drug crisis, it leads to more addiction, and is creating new dependencies in young people who weren't previously addicted. The evidence is very clear. We need a dramatic shift, and BC United's Better Responsible Plan is that shift, Mr. Speaker. It prioritizes treatment and recovery. When will the Premier actually focus on recovery and treatment and abandon this flawed taxpayer-funded drug crisis?
Minister.
Thanks very much, Honourable Speaker. And I do want to assure the House, Honourable Speaker, that our pathway to hope is all about treatment. It is all about supporting people where they are at on their journey to recovery. Since 2017, we've opened over 400 treatment beds. We are in the process right now of procuring in excess of 100 beds. We have just started the work to open a seamless model of care, right from detoxing and stabilization through to treatment at St. Paul's Hospital. We have invested in free or low barrier community counselling grants, hundreds of millions of dollars into upstream investments in child and youth mental health, all designed to try to create pathways to care and improved access for British Columbians to the care that we know they need. We were just up at New Roads talking about the beds that we've supported to continue to be in place there. There is remarkable work happening by our health authorities to provide virtual access, outpatient access, same-day clinical assessment and connection to care through Vancouver's Access Central. That's the work we're going to continue to do.
Member for Abbotsford West.
Mr. Speaker, the experiment's failing. However genuine the intention and motivation may have been, the government's approach is condemning more people, more young people, to a life of dependency and a risk of death. And what else do we know? We know that instead of prioritizing treatment and recovery, the government decided to divert over $1 million to two organizations, the Drug Users Liberation Front, the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users. The Liberation Front, apparently, took that money and it enabled them to buy heroin, cocaine, methamphetamines from organized crime on the dark web. That's taxpayer-funded drug trafficking by any definition, Mr. Speaker. Will the Premier, confronted by this evidence, immediately order a full forensic audit of every penny that went to those organizations?
Minister.
Thanks very much, Honourable Speaker. And I just want to reiterate the pain that communities are in as they watch, as people watch hundreds of their friends and community members impacted and die as a result of a volatile, unrelenting, toxic drug crisis that poses one of the most wicked problems for our healthcare system. And I have seen doctors and nurses and outreach workers put so much into trying to find innovative ways to make sure that they can reach out to people and connect them to the care and treatment that they need. And I will say that I think we all know that peer organizations are an important part of the continuum of services that we provide. And having said that, of course, we absolutely expect that, that government's partners act in a lawful manner, and so the contract between Vancouver Coastal Health and the organization the member is referring to has been terminated.
Member supplemental.
Mr. Speaker, this Liberation Front has admitted that taxpayers' money provided by this NDP government was used to establish a facility that was central to its drug trafficking activities. They could then divert other funds to acquire cryptocurrency that they used to buy illegal drugs from the dark web, that haven for organized crime, gangs, and drug cartels. Taxpayers' money is being used to make the drug crisis worse, not better. I'll ask again, confronted by the evidence, apparently the decision to shut it down, will the Minister and the Premier commit to a full audit to determine what exactly these public funds were used for? Hear, hear.
Minister.
Thanks very much, Honourable Speaker. And I would just say that contrary to those claims, what we know is that the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority contracted with the organization explicitly to provide drug checking, overdose prevention training, harm reduction services, and per diems for Indigenous peer workers. And we know that those are the services that were provided. And having said that, and we know, and having understanding as we all do that those are critical services to keep people alive and to connect them to care. Again, we expect that partners will will operate in a lawful manner. And in this case, Vancouver Coastal has terminated the contract with the organization.
Member for Surrey South.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Well, that's why we need an audit. Because the reality is that this government partnered with an organization that was buying illicit drugs off the dark web and then bragging about it through the media. But there hasn't been any police investigation. There hasn't even been any looking into it by this government. They didn't, begrudgingly withdraw the funding to this organization until it was brought up by the official opposition. This is a government that will give you everything for free related to using drugs except for treatment and aftercare. Absolutely. And medical professionals and frontline workers and even BC United, we've been raising red flags, urgently warning about the dangers of diversion from the NDP's so-called safe supply. And yet rather than stopping or even halting, pausing this failed program, the government's answer is, hey, let's flood the streets with even more drugs. Treatment, recovery, and providing a clear pathway away from addiction has to be the priority. But the NDP approach does not offer any off-ramps to recovery. So the question is, when will the Premier end this taxpayer-funded drug crisis that's creating an endless cycle of drug dependency?
Minister.
Thanks very much, Honourable Speaker, and thanks to the member for the question. We understand how critical it is that we are able to meet people who are struggling with substance use, who have addiction issues, where they're at, and connect them to the care and support that they need. And so that's why we've covered opioid agonist therapy through our PharmaCare program. It's a universal. That's why we're responding to all of the advice that we get from frontline physicians, from nurses, from people in public health and in our healthcare system about what they need in order to better care for their patients. Access to OAT is one of those. We've made it accessible through PharmaCare. We have over 100 treatment beds that are available free with no cost attached to them that, again, are available through health authorities. We've introduced low barrier and sometimes no fee community counselling in order to provide better access to the kinds of supports that people need. And that is work that we are doing, and faced with a system that was fundamentally deregulated, privatized, underfunded for years. That's a system of care that we are building to ensure that British Columbians get access to the care and support they need when they need it.
The bell ends the question.